Thank you very much, Anatoly, and thank you again for the inviting us for the such a wonderful opportunity, and also the thank you so much for the all of the people who participated today. And this is really fascinating to have a mutual dialogue with you. And let me briefly explain the characteristics of our papers and the presentation. So this is part of the special issue of the title of the Higher Education in Asia, which is the Journal of the Asian Economic Policy Review. But this journal is sponsored by the Japan Center for Economic Research and published from the WIRI. And this JCER, Japan Center for Economic Research, is a non-profit organization which is supported by the mostly Japanese industry or and also the stakeholders and the many distinguished Japanese and also the economists who are interested in Japan are participating in project. And the reason why they focus on the higher education is that there is a wide consensus or the wide sense of the crisis as to the future and the current status of the Japanese higher education. And this may give some influence or negative influence to the Japanese economy. That is our sense of the crisis. And then we also want to recognize that the very big changes are now ongoing to the Asian higher education. And maybe the question is that whether Japan is exceptionally kind of the failure cases or not, or the Japan could be kind of much more advanced or the kind of the front runner of the future decline of the Asian higher education and the Asian economy itself. So that is kind of main questions we posed. And I was nominated to write some kind of a Japanese case study, and Ugo was invited to make kind of the global, the regional landscape. So first, I will hand over to Ugo, and then I will talk about Japan later. Thank you so much. So Ugo, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much, Anatoly and Aki. I will basically have a presentation that will jump right into the focus. I imagine most of the audience is fairly knowledgeable about the trends in terms of society, economy, and higher education. But basically, the ones that I would like to basically underline is the really extremely quick growth of the higher education system that led for the higher education systems in East Asian countries to move very quickly from elite higher educations to what Martin Troll called universal higher education systems. This progress space very much align with a very quick development of the economy in many of the countries in the region, even if starting at different points. But these led this region to be very much aligned with the development, social economic development elsewhere in the world, particularly in the most developed countries, but also brought some challenges, which are also typical of the most developed economies in the world, which relate to decreasing natality rates, aging of the population, and several other challenges. So I'm going to, so this is a presentation that focuses mostly on economic aspects of the higher education, so much about cultural aspects or anything around those, that thematic, which is also important. I'm going to focus on these challenges from a public policy perspective. I will also not going to talk about typical and prevalent challenges that higher education systems in the region face and are a result of massification processes. These challenges have not been solved. Some have been solved a bit better than others, or attempted to be solved a little bit better than others, and they are still ongoing. Issues such as access and equity, funding, evaluation, governance, internationalization, etc., are still very much present as challenges that higher education systems in the region face. Instead, I will focus on the new emergent challenges that I think are coming in the region, and they need to be addressed sooner than later. The first challenge is this one, is the need consolidation of higher education systems owing to demographic shifts. And I bring here the case of Japan, because probably the case of Japan is the one that requires the most priority and prioritary attention, although the Republic of Korea and Taiwan are not too far behind, and even China is probably a decade or a decade and a half behind, and all of them are facing a similar scenario. And the similar scenario is very obvious, is that basically when we look at the current situation of Japan and of many of these countries, we see a decreasing proportion of the labor force, a very fast decreasing proportion of the younger generations, and an increasing proportion of the elderly population. And when we look at projections, and this is a projection from the United Nations, we see that demographic structure will only going to get worse. In this case, for Japan, where we basically see that the usual rule for the sustainability of welfare states, which is 3 people in the labor force to support 1 elderly people or 1 dependent people, is not valid anymore. And this brings, as you can imagine, a tremendous concern. But one thing for higher education systems is very clear, is that since the number of students entering higher education is decreasing, we're not going to need as many universities, we're not going to need as many courses being offered. So there will be a need for a decrease in number of, and this again, this is another set of tables that show something which is concerning in terms of the social structure of society for the future. Because when we look particularly to the graph on the right side, we see that the dependency ratio in the population will increase, which will require a complete change in education, but also labor laws to accommodate kind of sustainability of the fiscal and the welfare system, in this case in Japan, but also in many other countries in the region. For the higher education system, basically means that we're going to have less traditional students entering universities and less domestic students enrolling as well. So there are 2 possibilities in terms of policies that can be enacted. I offered two possibilities. There probably be more. I thought about these 2. One is the focus on non-traditional students, which I believe is not really too feasible. First of all, because if these students come into or replace, or the idea that they can replace to a very large extent traditional students in universities is not too realistic, because even if they come in big numbers to the university, they will all be doing bachelor degrees. And what does this mean? It means that the revenue for the universities that usually comes from a bachelor degree associated with a traditional student is not going to be the same that non-traditional students, which will basically do a specialization or short courses, will bring. So the revenue will be much lower. And the fact that usually when we talk about short courses or specializations, post-graduations, they tend not to be subsidized by the state. So usually they come from the public purse, and either it comes from the state or from the public purse. Both have issues, as I will going to show later on. Of course, the fact that we're going to have, if we're going to go this route and we're going to have non-traditional students, we're going to need also that the university staff changes their pedagogy, because teaching these traditional 18-year-old to 22, 23-year-old students is not as teaching mature students with labor experience, so on and so forth. And then we have to consider the fact that already at this point, we have both in terms of private and public debt levels that start to be quite high, and that will definitely constrain investments, meaning that both on the private side, meaning families, and on the public side, meaning governments, there will be some constraints to where the money can be allocated and how much money can be allocated to investments in education. And my argument is these will be much lesser than they are at the moment. Of course, there's also the possibility of focusing on replacing some of, or a proportion of the domestic students with international students, which I present in this slide. The issue is when we look at the international students and the flows in the region, what we see is that a lot of the students that can be attracted to the region tend to be from Africa, South and Southeast Asia. Of course, we always have many Chinese students because of the size of the population circling worldwide, but students from these countries tend to be the ones that tend to come to East Asia to study. And what we see is that this is a bit problematic because the families of these students, although they might be willing to invest in the education of their offsprings, they probably don't have enough financial resources to really support educational and lifestyle expenses of the students, of their students coming to countries like Japan or Korea, which have life costs much higher than the ones that they have in their own countries. On the other hand, it has been very difficult to attract students from Europe and North America. Usually the flow tends to be towards Europe and North America and not the other way around. Of course, some of them can come, but not in sufficient numbers to make it substantial. And at the same time, we have to see that universities are increasingly competing for these students. And I'm not completely sure that universities in East Asia are in a position that are able really to attract many of these students. At the same time, you can say, okay, maybe if the universities cannot do this, maybe this needs to pass through migration policies. And some countries are already doing this. I know Japan is doing this. I know South Korea is doing this to some extent. The thing is, it's not so much the doing it, but how it can be done. And the big problem here is that most East Asian societies tend to be very cultural and socially homogeneous, and they tend to adopt an assimilalist perspective, meaning, I mean, okay, we welcome these international students, but we will try to transform these international students with other cultures, so on and so forth, into our culture. And this might be, on the one hand, it might preserve social cultural stability, but on the other hand, it will curtail the typical benefits that immigrants bring, which is new ideas, new thought processes, and creative potential. And at the same time, this creates a substantial level of public investment, which might be problematic. And you know, the population, the taxpayers in these countries might be thinking, okay, why are we spending money on bringing international students here when this money can be invested in our population? This really shows the constraints that both families and governments are facing, and this is the debt of the government, and this is the debt of families. And what we see is that both families and governments tend to be highly constrained or increasingly constrained in terms of debt, making their ability to invest much more difficult. If you look particularly to the household debt as a percentage of the net disposable income in Japan and Korea, we see very concerning numbers here. So if these problems continue, how is this going to happen? I mean, if governments and if families have constrained ability to invest, and if there are less students, what is going to happen to the system? In terms of the higher education system, what is going to be clear is that the competition will become really fierce. Between universities, not only national, but also in the international level. I believe most of the public higher education systems will be saved because they tend to be located and distributed in different parts of the countries, and they have an important role. They have an important role because local students will likely cannot go to universities elsewhere, so they need to go to universities in the region, and this is the possibility for these students to get educated. And on the other hand, these universities contribute to the social and economic development of the region. So from a national and regional political and economic perspective, this should guarantee the safety of most public higher education institutions. The most reputable universities will also likely to survive without much of a problem. They tend to be overwhelmingly public. They have the reputation to attract students, national and foreign. They have diversity of incomes, and because they are much more research engaged, they represent strategic assets for governments. They represent the pride of the country, the ability of the country to show elsewhere we have good universities that can compete globally. So in terms of political and geostrategic rationales, there is all reasons to keep them alive. Now, the ones that will really suffer a lot will be the private higher education institutions, because their survival, their economic survival depends on tuitions. The revenue comes from tuitions, and these will be the ones that will see less and less students enrolling into them, because as the number of students decreases, the ability of students to go to public universities is becoming much easier, much better, and they will always be preferred than the private higher education institutions. And these private institutions are either specialized or highly reputed. So this will likely lead to either the closure or the merging of a lot of universities in the nations, which will create two big problems. One of them will be the unemployment of several highly qualified academics that we're going to face difficult life choices. Some of them probably are going to be in their 50s. And we know in 30 years old in the labor market, we're in a very difficult position. And on the other hand, it will create a disincentive for people to do PhDs, because those people who do PhDs to become academics will know, or at least will have an idea that their dream cannot be realized because there are no jobs available. So this is the first challenge. The second challenge is a little bit different, is the need for universities to readapt their teaching to the changes that social and technological paradigms are bringing to societies. So the first one that I would like to talk about is the fact that automation and the fourth industrial revolution are already here. Universities are definitely not prepared to deal with them. And we see this very clear with the most recent ChatGPT crisis, where universities in the region basically were reactive and know very well what to do. So this is problematic, but not only we have universities, but we also have to have universities increasingly considering what the future labor markets mean and will be. So at the moment, and this is not only a problem of universities or of the higher education sector, but also of families. There's still very much the idea in the mindset of students and families that I will do course A to have job A. This is becoming less and less common. And instead, what we're seeing is we're having people having multiple jobs throughout their career. So what we need to provide is not so much an education at university level that is focused on providing very heavily on technical competences, but rather providing transversal technical competences that allows the students to adapt and try to do many different jobs, many different works. And basically, and the most important of all, is to give the students the ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn, because they're going to have to adapt to a very uncertain, technologically dependent kind of labor market. I have to say one thing, this is not only an issue that needs to be done at education level, it needs to be done throughout the education level. Because if we have students that arrive to universities with a completely mindset, it's not going to be 3, 4 years, 5 years at universities that are going to change the way they think, their aspirations, etc., etc. We have to have this perspective, this pedagogy of learning how to learn, to unlearn, and to relearn since kindergarten, since primary education, so that when students arrive to the university, this is already something very common to them. And universities, to some extent, are trying hard to help students to open their minds and to adapt. And one of the things that they're doing, for example, is coming up with this more kind of liberal education, general education studies, which many students don't realize the importance, but it's important to be there. And many universities are also having pedagogies in place that are much more dependent on project-based learning and experiential learning that give students an experience and the possibility to face environments and the application of their knowledge as if they were in the labor market. Sorry, this is not moving. Okay. Now, the changes cannot be restricted to universities. This needs to be a conjoint effort, and in particularly, it needs to be an effort that, on the one hand, starts preparing universities to start teaching to kind of different type of students. So it really needs to be a kind of a pedagogical change, a learning change that starts to take account non-traditional students, and this links very well to challenge number one. But also university needs to start thinking about offering kind of training, offering courses that are not necessarily related only to professional development, but also to foster cultural, social, and self-enrichment kind of courses that the non-traditional students will likely be more interested in. And I can talk about this later on in the Q&A if to develop it a bit better. Now, besides universities doing this, we need to have, in particularly, the involvement of accreditation and evaluation agencies. They need to be part of this to transform learning and education at universities. And in this process, it is absolutely crucial to start changing universities as they are and systems as they are by introducing new technologies, such as the ones related to blockchain. Blockchain, for example, allows to have digital academic certifications that are immutable, making it easier for students to bring these with them, being portable, credited, and they can move around. So it facilitates mobility, which is absolutely critical. Now, one thing that is important is the best way, and this is nothing new, the best way to deal with uncertainty is investing or putting your capabilities in different pots so that you're more or less ready to deal with different needs that might arise from economy, from society, or from technological development. And this will require programmatic and institutional diversification in the higher education systems. We need to have different universities doing different things. We need to have a specialization, but one that is integrated. This includes a change in careers and in the evaluation schemes of academic careers. If we need someone to teach, we need to bring someone that is teaching oriented, that is hired because of their pedagogical or teaching ability or potential, but they also then need to work on teaching, on creating innovative curricula, develop new courses, follow student learning and understand what's working and what is not. And then they need to be evaluated for that. People that are hired to do teaching and they are good at teaching do not necessarily need to be evaluated for research. And one step that we need to do for this to become a reality is to get rid of the lecturer careers and have everybody become, full professors, associate professors, assistant professors, no matter if they're evaluated for their research potential, teaching potential, or service potential. Basically, what I'm arguing here is that people need to be evaluated for the best of their abilities and for the work that they were hired to do, and not just for a broad one-fits-all kind of evaluating structure. Finally, in terms of the academic research part, I mean, it's undoubtable these countries, and it's very positive to see, but we continue to see a critical problem. Although there was an increase in the production of papers, and probably China is the country that represents this evolution in a more dramatic way, we continue to see a very problematic kind of statistic. When we look here at China, for example, we see that only 21% of the papers are done in international cohortship. When to Japan, 32%, to Korea, only 30%, basically 31%. When we look to what happens in the other powerhouses, scientific houses in the world, we see completely different values, such as in France, basically 60%, such as in Germany, more than 50%, Sweden, 66%, to be very centric, still has a much larger numbers, in international growth. International collaboration for this publication knowledge to be generated, meaning of public events that, it is relatively small in certain places, but it needs to be enlarged or at least sustained. But the most important is the lower level of internationalization needs to change. The only way to promote really an effective, long-lasting collaboration is by bringing international staff, postdoctoral staff, and doctoral students, international, and mingling them with the national ones to create an environment where ideas can flow and where learning, which kind of a broad creative learning take place. Now, it's becoming a difficulty. It's difficult at this point to attract many of these excellent foreign staff, postdocs or doctoral students. China faces one more issue, which is the geopolitical challenges regarding science that relate to US-China relations. Now, two more things to consider, and I'll conclude my presentation. One is a shift from quantity to quality in terms of scientific research production. It's not the amount of papers that counts, it's the quality of the ideas. And actually, this publish or perish culture as found by many researchers in the literature, brought many complicated cases that does not favor the academic job, the scientific job, or the role of universities. And these are cases of scientific misconduct that are brought because the pressure for career advancement is so much relying on this obsession with publishing more and in specific journals. The other thing is the need to balance our basic and fundamental research with applied research. When we look at the research profiles in East Asian countries, there's a very strong emphasis on applied research, but without creating the basic and fundamental research, it's very difficult for the future to develop really applicable research, which can be truly innovative. In terms of innovation, the need also to make a stronger effort to move only from an investment or a tremendous investment in the natural science and engineering to bring in multidisciplinary research, interdisciplinary research that includes the social sciences and the humanities, because innovation is definitely multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary. All right, so this is my presentation. In sum, we have a tremendous evolution in Asia, but very complicated challenges ahead, and they need to start being solved now, as soon as possible, mitigate the pain that they will bring rather than trying to solve them later on. So this is my presentation. I think we can pass it on to Aki. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugo. Let me directly go into my presentation. Just a moment, please. Okay, so the Hugo already discussed about the two things. One is that very serious impact, especially on the demographic change or the aging. So that is one aspect, and the other one is that we have lots of challenges and kind of the need for transformation, including the way of the education and also the research. And the one very big concern, and probably that must be true, is that if your society become kind of aged or super aged, the society tend to be more conservative and very difficult to change. That is a very big problem for us. So that you could easily understand that the people are becoming much more older, then you will become more kind of the reluctant to the change. And sometimes that could be kind of the drastically changed, like Meiji Restoration, but we are in before that. So that this is really kind of big, the difficult time for the changing. That is the situation. But at the same time, we are trying to do many things. And let me explain that what we did challenged in the very difficult condition. And we have the kind of this very stable problem about the quality of the education and also the research as a concern. So even the 1980s, at the time, the economic condition of Japan was really peak. There was already some kind of concern of the characteristics of the education of Japan, that much more focusing on the which university you graduate or which university you enter, and like University of Tokyo was already said by the external visitor from the United States. And also the president, then president of the University of Tokyo, made a kind of caution that the Japanese the research environment is not really good, even at that time. And after that, we have the lots of the investment. Probably it is earlier than other the advanced economy as well. In the 1990s, we have a kind of much more focusing on the investment to the basic sciences. And then this resulted some the booming of the Nobel Prize winners in the last 10 years. Having said so, after that we have lots of difficulty, especially in the last 20 years. And if you could see that this indicator that the number of top 10% papers, actually for example, University of Tokyo, it is the same within the last 10 years. So this means that we are, all of the papers in the total is increasing. So this resulted into the very big drop in the world rank in terms of this indicator. And under this condition, my paper examined the impact of national policies on higher education, particularly economic and fiscal policies since the beginning of the 21st century. And then try to discuss the future perspective on the role of the higher education in national economic development, considering the Japanese experience and the global challenges. I cannot say everything, but so if you see that paper which is open access, I just focusing on a kind of the historical background, but just like the South Korea or the Taiwan or the Philippines, we share the common characteristics that we have a kind of the centralize our investment into the limited number of the national top university, and the rest of the private universities absorb the demand for the learning. And we have lots of the different types of the vector for the blurring public-private distinction. This is again the global trends, but sometimes this is based on a welfare policy and sometimes related to the neoliberalism. And now becoming much more strong intervention by the government under the new public management, not only for the public sector, but also even for the non-profit private university sectors. I will explain later on this. And in this paper, I made a kind of the reflection of the Japanese economy, what has happened in the last 10 years. But let me just highlight the very the key point to discuss on the current discussion. The one discussion is about the positioning of the top university, especially national university, into the core component of the drive of the economic development of the knowledge economy. And that was happened. Actually, I'm really pleased that Professor H. Aoki, of my colleague of Tohoku University, actually lead the discussion on this. But there is a kind of governmental restructuring of the kind of integration of the science technology agency and also the Ministry of Education in the 20 years ago, made the significant the positioning of this the central role of the national university into the central role of the economic policy. And after that, we incorporated national university, and then we pushed the university to be internationalized. And also we following the Korea and the China, we also tried to make a academic excellence initiative on this. And then we faced with the kind of some kind of the policy challenges of the changing the ruling party. That is also again relatively the same the trends that just like experience, just like the Taiwan or the South Korea experience. So that by doing so, we have some turmoil or the shift of the two dichotomical policy direction. One is that the liberal democratic parties, the traditional idea to concentrate more on elite top universities, and the other one is the kind of giving more opportunity or the support to the less advantaged group of the especially economic and socially to widening the participation or the equalizing the participation. So then in the last about 10 years ago, we had a kind of change of the ruling party and Democratic Party in Japan. We have more like that investment to the human resources in a wider manner. And then that we are trying to giving more opportunity to send our students to give the more international experience. It is called the global human resources. And after that, we have about 7 years the relatively consistent policy under the Abe cabinet. Again, that this is more focusing on the excellence initiative. And then the campaign was basically try to make 10 universities within world top 100 within this year, 2023. And unfortunately, it is not achieved at all. So that maybe we can make it to set it as a failure, but basically probably the goal itself was not appropriate from the beginning. But anyway, for that purpose, we try to make the kind of internationalization and the academic excellence initiative or the developed research management capacity of the university. And then but the situation is more not really like a consistent because that we face with the another types the problem of the pandemic, as you know. And then we are now facing with a new stage by under the Prime Minister Kishida's new cabinet. And of course, it is the part of ruled by the Liberal Democratic Party, but the direction is slightly different, or the much more focusing on a human resource development side again. And I could say relatively focusing on a kind of the discussion part. The first, I'd like to explain that what is the kind of, maybe we can say that Japan's failure in higher education policy in the last 10 to 20 years. So first of all, the many people say that this is inefficient university reforms efforts and increased bureaucratic micromanagement of government. That is one of the things we are always discussing on this. The other one is underfunding of the higher education budget, budget constraints, and the stagnation of the tuition fees. But you can easily understand that the demographic change does matter. That actually our working population is becoming as a share of our total population. It is shrinking. So this is not really easy for us to sustain our economy. And sadly, the aging of the Japanese society, this is the very big problem, and not only for the current economy, but also the shrinking domestic talent pool, and the efforts to increase the female and international student enrollment is now ongoing. And fourth, the slow internationalization of higher education. So we are trying to do that, but still we are quite slow compared with that, partly because we don't have a kind of effective market mechanism to drive on this. And finally, the underdeveloped the reward system to qualification and the knowledge in the labor market. So this is related to the last point of the discussion of the Hugo. So how can we motivate the learners or within a kind of very good ecosystem on this. So what we are trying to do is two things. One is that the 10 trillion yen university fund scheme, which is the very, very kind of risky, high stake approach that, as you already mentioned, as Hugo already showed that the national debt is 250% of our annual budget. And this is really, really high, right? And we are now trying to borrow more money, 10 trillion money, and then this will yield some the kind of the, if we operate in a proper manner, we can yield about 3% the kind of return, and that money can be utilized for the supporting 25 years from now to accelerate the financial development of the top university. That is the kind of our scenario. Why it is possible is that this is related to the kind of the COVID-19 pandemic, that because of that we need to stimulate our national economy, and because of that it is now justified to borrow more money, and this is a part of this scheme. Secondly, there is a comprehensive revision is needed to accept highly skilled international workers and provide global careers. That is, we are now trying to do that. And then for that purpose, what we are trying to do is, first of all, we already have lots of discussion in the Abe cabinet, is that try to make a knowledge ecosystem, means that to make a kind of a collaborative the interaction between the government and the industry and also the university to co-create the new knowledge value. And then by doing so, we can develop our economy. So that is one kind of the ecosystem we are trying to develop. And then the university fund system is a part of this. The other one is that under Kishida cabinet, and also maybe Democratic Party Japan also had this idea, is that the human resource development ecosystem. So this means that to incentivize the kind of the people to learn more, not only for the young student, but also for the adult Americans and also the international student, and of course female students as well, to learn and then become more wealthy on this. So, but this is still the very, very initial stage to discuss on this, so that we are not really sure what we can do. And but anyway, we are gradually, rapidly trying to develop some idea. And then we are now trying to anyway to invite invite 400,000 international students by the next 10 years. And then we want to make 500,000 Japanese students to study abroad somehow. And that is what we are trying to do as an idea. But at the same time, what we discuss is that we need to have much more like the efforts to provide more capacity development of the university management, of university leaders to manage the university in that direction. That is what we are trying to think about. And then the final argument, what I can do is that maybe this could be some kind of a shift from the conventional new public management scheme, that the principal agent model means that the government as a kind of the principal or the owner, and the agent university have a contract, and then we are got some budget from the based on performance. That is kind of the NPM model, and this is becoming much stronger, and this is really the problem for us. And then most of the economists say that this is not the neoliberalism at all. It is a new public management, or the much more bigger the government intervention. But if you see that now we are trying to make a kind of 25 years project, so this is a really long, So this condition is not only a kind of very short-term one, but much more like the engagement or the long-term stewardship. This means that the purposeful dialogue between the investor, the government, and the company or the university to mutual sustainable prosperity. And the stakeholder is not only limited to the government, but much more wider, sometimes international organization, global capital, or the student itself, international student and the domestic student. That is the kind of new way of our thinking. So that kind of things may happen in Japan and also the other countries. So this may change the relationship between the so-called the publicness and university. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aki and Hugo. Excellent presentations. A lot of food for thinking about this very complex and dynamic region, which faces so many challenges at this point in time. At least you show to us what might be a kind of an emerging crisis of some kind. So I was curious to see how this might relate to other regions in general. Maybe at some point when you think about countries in Southeast Asia, for example, are they a solution or a problem in terms of international student mobility, the flows, competition, and so on. But let me just first of all, let me just invite colleagues to use this time, 10, 15 minutes. And I can see some comments in the chat. Hugo and Aki, you can probably see them too. Those of you who would like to speak instead of printing them into the chat, please do so. So where should we begin? I saw the first question coming from Philip Olbach asking a question to Hugo. I don't know if Phil would like to speak, or maybe I can read if that's a better kind of way to do it. So Hugo, can you see it? Hugo.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I read it. Yeah, I mean, yes. What I had in mind was not so much the more typical kind of liberal general education, but rather more or less the model that is applied in institutions such as Hong Kong U, where basically there is the possibility for the students to engage with courses that relate to liberal or general education. Making them compulsory or not will depend to a very large extent of the possibilities that can be realized. I mean, my argument is more in terms of offering the students, taking the students from having their courses with a very strong emphasis only on the technical side of the knowledge specialization that they're interested in, to kind of lower that a bit and balance it a bit more with disciplines, courses, or areas of knowledge that might not be as relevant or potentially relevant to the profession that they have in mind, but nonetheless allow them to experience new knowledges or eventually unintended knowledges that might be beneficial for them, and to them not only as citizens, but also to better adapt them to potential challenges that they will face in the labor market. So my idea is really not to kind of force in a kind of a structured way liberal or general education, but rather to have it present and available to students. It's more in that sense.
Thank you. So then I would give a chance to chat first, because they appeared first there, and then to Mubin Fridi. So it's a question from Rakibul Hassan. One of the biggest problems of internationalization of Japanese higher education is the relatively lower level of English language proficiency. Don't you think this issue should be addressed?
Thank you very much. This is still a very big issue, and as a system, we are trying to change it by much more focusing on the education for the kind of speaking and writing and expression, and then the testing system is also changing a lot. And the thing is that this will obviously increase the gap between the people who can manage to adapt the new environment, or the kind of invest for the kind of just like the Hong Kong elite people, and others. So that really gives the kind of very big controversy for us. That really contradict the traditional idea of the kind of equity. So that is a big issue. So that, but anyway, some people are really already started to change their attitude, just like other country.
Thank you. And then Ludwika, you just raised your hand, and then I saw the comment in the chat.
Yeah, I still have a couple of minutes. I'll have to leave, so very short. I was just typing another comment in, so I will just say it. I will not. Great talks. Thanks so much. Great to see you, Aki, Hugo. So the challenge, Hugo, I don't think it's a crisis. I think it's shrinking of the systems, which is actually healthy for the systems, because then it's higher education has better quality. Because all these privates is really low in quality. I mean, I'm now really going for extreme argumentation, but saying for me, it's really like, is it really a crisis? Are we talking about? Okay, or is it us academics lamenting that we will be losing our jobs? That's one comment. The other comment is for Aki. I'm really impressed that Japan plans to invest in international global talent. And especially attracting, global researchers. I was visiting for a couple of months at Nagoya University, which was a fantastic experience. And my comment is, what I've seen also in Germany, because in German system also started to attract excellence from all over. The structures and system is not ready for international staff. The cultures are not ready, the structures are not ready, the language system, bureaucracy is not ready for international scholars, especially top talents. So what is the government doing to change the structures? So not fix the people issue, but fix the institutional issue. So that's it. Thank you. Great talks. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, I can probably start. Yeah, I mean, it was not really a crisis. It is, a consolidation. So, but these consolidations are always painful. So definitely painful in the sense that a lot of jobs are going to be lost, and not only academic jobs, but administrative jobs, so on and so forth. And some people are in a certain stage of their lives, and it will be a substantial number that these will be problematic. In terms of increasing quality, yes, likely it will lead to an increase of quality. Because in a certain way, it's a kind of a reverse, right? We went from elite to massify, then universal, and we're going back to a smaller system that in principle will have more quality. So I definitely don't disagree with anything that you just said. Aki?
Thank you. So the first question, so actually in the last 2 weeks, we got 3 news of the 3 female university and junior colleges decided to close their university the program because of the kind of the demographic change. And unfortunately, these are highly kind of evaluated, high reputation in quality education. So actually the shrinking market sometimes or occasionally damage not only kind of the low quality education, but much more kind of luxury, good quality education, which is not really cost effective sometimes. That is a very big concern we have especially in the private higher education sector. And also the second question is what to do is that the university fund scheme is very, very interesting because this is a kind of consultancy by the government how to develop our capacity to for example internationalize our staff members. So by kind of building this scheme that we are forced to think about a lot about making benchmark with the University of Hong Kong and something like that. And by doing so, we are trying to transform it. And I'm not sure whether it will work, but it is not the very kind of traditional types of micromanagement, much more like the capacity development, the co-working between the government and the university. So I'm not really sure whether it is really good or not, but anyway, by doing so, we are trying to change our system.
Thank you. So as we don't have much time, I'll probably just give a chance to the 2 questions or comments from Mubin Kanafridi and Queenie Lam, and then Hugo and Aki will respond to those questions or comments. So please, Mubin.
Thank you so much for the nice presentation. I'm a research student at the Kobe University, Japan, under Ogawa Sensei. So my question is to Dr. Hugo, that one of your suggestions was reskilling of the students of public universities for diversification their skills. So the reskilling would also increase the investment in public universities, which will also increase the public debt in Japan. So how do you considering it investing even more in the graduates that were invested before?
Okay, maybe Hugo,
Well,
yeah.
Well, it would really depend on how so one thing is the idea, the other thing and the design, the other thing would be the design and the implementation. It's a bit difficult to answer to that because it will really depend what would be the main policy rationale of the restructuration of the whole system. So basically, both could be correct, and both might be incorrect or only one correct. It would really depend on what are the priorities and what is the process that any of the government of these nations would decide would be prioritary or politically the best one to follow. But those would be two possibilities on top of the table, definitely. But hard to say which would be the end result or which one would be the one actually happening.
Thank you so much for your wonderful answer.
Thank you.
Queenie.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation, Hugo and Akiyoshi. I'm less skeptical about the prospect of private higher education institutions, mainly because I just saw news from the German side that the new enrollment numbers for 2019 and 21 showed that the number of new enrollment newly enrolled students dropped for public universities, but then for private university, it has gone up 50%, mainly because they cater for the non-traditional students. Because there are two Zoom calls in the same room. Sorry. So on the German side, the private universities are responding faster to non-traditional students, but these are not international students because they are enrolled in part-time studies. And the same actually happened in Hong Kong after SARS 2003. A lot of the private tracks of public universities in Hong Kong actually boomed after SARS because people returned to do these like MA programs. So of course, like we're working on international education, we tend to think about sources from international other countries, but would it be in Japan or in Hong Kong? Like would the same thing happen again after COVID? Like, do we have numbers already to see if private universities are actually more flexible or more adaptive to the new type of students from the local market, like mature students?
Well, I would say that usually the private sector is the first one to react, right? Because they know that their survival as organizations depends on it. Excuse me. So you can say, yeah, okay, the enrollments really, excuse me, in the private universities might already be catering for non-traditional students, so on and so forth, and it's their adaptation. And true, excuse me, that is true, but it also reflects something else. Reflects that probably they are not as competitive with the public universities, and that's why they're already looking into these kind of student populations. But then you have to think, it might be also because the public universities are not looking into these non-traditional students yet. And this is why the private institutions are able to capture them. Now, the question is, what happens when these public institutions start seeing the numbers of their traditional students declining, and they start looking into these students, these non-traditional students? Then suddenly, the kind of student population that these private universities are already using to survive suddenly is not there anymore. So either they go and try to look for some other kind of student that they might bring, or they are in serious trouble. So
yes, but the public universities are not so fast in responding because of the administration and regulations. So I don't know if it's the same in Japan. In Hong Kong, it's pretty fast. They are flexible. So they already have these two tracks, the self-financed track and the public funded track. So Hong Kong's universities are relatively flexible. But if the same would not happen in Germany, like by the time they realize that and they change all the regulations, I think the market would disappear.
Thank you.
Right.
So let me say that in the case of Japan, so the so-called the advanced enrollment rate to the tertiary education after 18 years old, after just graduating, after graduation of the secondary education is almost 80% or more. So under this condition, we have a kind of forecast to have 10 to 20% decrease of our young population within next 10 to 20 years. And this really serious, and this is accelerated because of the COVID-19. Nobody wants to make a kind of the children under the COVID-19 pandemic, right? So this really gives the very serious condition. But it is also true that there is some differences. But that Tokyo, maybe we will have continuous maintain the same population, or the even increase if we are really successful. The international students, they may go to the big metropolitan area. And also the one other possibility is the kind of adult student. And maybe you are right that maybe the traditional university like us are also trying to make more, the program fit to them, especially the adult student who want to make kind of reskilling, upskilling thing. But possibly the kind of online-based, the for-profit higher education is now going ahead. And then the other possibility that the non-Japanese higher education state provider could enter this new market, but this is not really, we are not really have any kind of evidence at this moment. But this is what is going on. And probably the computer really does matter. That now it is becoming more easy for us to make a kind of translation to Japanese, at least in online. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, colleagues. Hugo and Aki, I'd like to.
Aki,
yeah, please.
Anatoly.
Yep.
Sorry, there is a question in the chat from Svetlana that I would like to address, if possible.
All right, please.
So, yeah, thank you so much for the question. At least from my side, I would like to answer to that. I understand the idea. So, because research is international and teaching is not necessarily international. So this would be part of the change that needs to happen. Teaching is not necessarily local or national only. I mean, if you are dedicated to teach, you want to teach with the most up-to-date pedagogies, with most up-to-date learning approaches, etc. So it actually can provide a boost for someone that is teaching oriented to become more international, because they will become more international through doing something that they're good at, something that motivates them. And just because they're focusing on teaching, it doesn't mean that they don't do research. But likely the research that they might do is research based on teaching. This will kind of force them, or will be a good motivation for them to engage with the state of the art in terms of teaching globally. So I see this in a different perspective. I see this as a motivating factor rather than more of a differentiating factor between the two activities. These cases, I have to say, I've seen this in practice. It's not easy to implement, but I've seen it. When I was at Carnegie Mellon, you have full professors of teaching and practice that they act globally, more than nationally or locally. And this is the idea here as well. Aki, I don't know if you want to. Okay.
Let me just very briefly that I think that the internationalization of the academia will ongoing in Japan as well. But we also have the same concern with other part of the world, that the geopolitical tension that really does matter here, and I really simply hope that the much more healthy interaction like today will continue, and that this is not really actually assured, unfortunately.
Thank you.